The Franco-Prussian War was a conflict between the Second French Empire and the Northern German Confederation led by the Kingdom of Prussia, which, owing to the German superior strength and numbers, quickly led to the capitulation of the French Empire and the capture of its emperor, Napoleon III. The conflict culminated with the Siege of Paris in the winter of 1871, in which the German troops invaded the French capital. Months later, the German states unified into a German empire, shifting the balance of power in Europe towards a now unified, powerful Germany. Britain, who mostly stayed out of it, of course kept a close eye on the conflict, and all the major newspapers, journals, and magazines reported at length on the course of the War of 1870 and on the prospects for the British in the changed Europe of 1871. Out of this national obsession with the conflict in Europe emerged a short story written by ex-soldier George Tompkins Chesney, The Battle of Dorking in 1871. The Battle of Dorking recounts the final days before and during a fictionalized, devastating invasion of Britain by a German-speaking enemy, retold 50 years after the fact by a nameless narrator to his grandchildren who have grown up in a contested Britain that is now a heavily taxed annex of the enemy. The German-speaking invaders are never named and are instead referred to obliquely as the other power, or the enemy. Battle of Dorking was not only an overnight national sensation and controversy. Most readers saw the idea that the greatest imperial power in the world could be invaded, let alone could cease to exist, was ludicrous. But for many, it was an indictment of nationalistic hubris. For even more, it was an outrage, unmerited judgment, and a betrayal of Great Britain. But Battle of Dorking would set off a trend of its own, one that literary historians would eventually call invasion literature, fiction that spoke to the taboo and the thrill of the obviously ludicrous idea that the sovereign empire of Britain could ever fall to a foreign power. But what if? Between 1871 and 1914, over 60 works of fiction for adult readers describing hypothetical invasions of Great Britain were published. During that time, British writer H.G. Wells combined the popularity of invasion literature with the widespread interest in the idea of life on Mars to pioneer a whole new genre, one that has endured in popularity in some form ever since: the alien invasion.
Lord, they're turning into flames. The whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks for the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Here's an idea. Aliens in fiction are never just aliens, just as monsters in fiction are never just monsters. There is the literal function within the narrative, of course, but then there is that layer of metaphor, of significance to the culture that the work is being presented to, a significance that may not even be obvious to either the author or the audience until some time later, if ever. So while I think it's not interesting to reduce a text to a one-to-one allegory, it is important to be open to textual metaphor, especially where aliens come in, be they sympathetic, threatening, beyond comprehension, or total gibberish.
Guys, it's me! Bring me out of this Frankenstein box!
Aliens as a narrative device can reflect a historically colonized people, they can be the innocence of childhood, they can be some sort of spiritual revelation, they can be a class oppressed by poverty, or the ravages of poverty itself. Or they can be dumb as rocks.
Welcome to Earth.
Author and professor of English Frank McConnell describes Wells' Martians as what you fear most, what your culture and environment have taught you is the worst thing that could happen to you, the situation over which you would have the least degree of control. Wells was writing for an audience of Victorian Britons, whom he describes in the opening of the novel as secure in their empire over this earth. Wells was writing for an audience for whom the very idea that intelligent beings from another planet could be capable of launching an attack on the most powerful nation on Earth was a most bizarre and outlandish notion. But the invasion narrative is a manifestation of different cultural anxieties in different eras. For instance, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers came at the height of the McCarthy era, and is just one of many invasion narratives that were released during the beginning of the Cold War. However, when I say an alien is never just an alien, I do not mean that the alien is a one-to-one metaphor for something else, and that is a trap that a lot of people tend to fall into.
Is that the terrorist?
Yes and no, Dakota Fanning. Interpreting Animal Farm as a metaphor for totalitarian communism is great for your 8th grade English class, but metaphor is rarely that simple. Invasion narratives capture the ecosystem of the culture in which they were made, what that culture fears most. With that in mind, we are going to compare invasion narratives from two wildly different cultures, America in the 1990s and America in 2005.
My lovely lady lumps, check it out.
We're going to live on! We're going to survive! Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
Independence Day is a 1996 film directed by Roland Emmerich, starring Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum, and Bill Pullman, each playing characters experiencing different perspectives during an alien invasion, that of a soldier, a scientist, and the President of the United States, respectively. Over the course of the film, the invading alien horde wipes out most major cities on the planet, and all hope seems lost until the scientist devises a computer virus which, with the help of the soldier, he is able to upload into the mothership, disabling all subordinate ships. This enables the American military not only to destroy the local ship threatening them, but also to instruct the rest of the world on how to do the same. And the remnants of humanity celebrate.
Didn't I promise you fireworks?
It is dumb as a bag of rocks, and it is one of my favorite movies. I love it. War of the Worlds is a 2005 film directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Cruise.
Get a hug? Confusing handshake? Kick in the teeth?
The film follows dock worker and inadequate father Ray Ferrier on the rare weekend when he has custody of his 2 children, in which an alien invasion happens and he tries to protect them. As their circumstances become increasingly desperate, they narrowly escape certain death several times, and eventually Ray is separated from his oldest child. The film concludes when all family members are reunited, and the aliens die from their lack of immunity to the planet's pathogens. It is a stone-cold bummer, and I also kind of love it. Despite taking place over a century after the novel takes place, the bones of Wells' story remain intact. The invasion is seen from the perspective of one character. It is more an episodic survival narrative than anything else. The tripods are fairly faithful. The narrator is tested by another character driven to madness whom he must kill in order to survive. And the invasion is stopped not by human ingenuity, but by a lack of immunity.
They were undone, destroyed, after all of man's weapons and devices had failed, by the tiniest creatures that God in his wisdom put upon this earth.
In this way, Spielberg's adaptation is perhaps the most faithful, but War of the Worlds isn't like, say, Les Miserables, where it's the same characters and basically the same story each time. War of the Worlds is not a classic story, per se. It is more of a classic premise. And the characters themselves are totally different in each iteration. Spielberg himself has pointed out that adaptations of War of the Worlds tend to come about in times of cultural stress, with the 2 most well-known adaptations, besides the '05 version, being Orson Welles' radio drama from 1938, and the film adaptation from 1953. And of course there was the original novel, a twist on a trend in invasion literature, released during a period of growing international tension in Europe, where everyone kind of sensed that a great war was on the horizon. So while the 1890s was technically a time of peace in the UK, it was a peace squished between recent violence and the massive sense of tension growing throughout Europe. But War of the Worlds is also read as a biting critique of British imperialism, encouraging the reader to consider the world from the perspective of a people being invaded by colonizers. Wells states this explicitly in the first chapter of the novel. And before we judge the Martians too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals, but upon its own inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants, in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? I bring this up because the context in which War of the Worlds, the novel, became a success in the 1890s, and the context in which Independence Day became a success in the 1990s, are perhaps more analogous to each other than the 2005 adaptation. Both Independence Day and Wells' novel came about during times of relative peace and prosperity for the people living in the dominant world power of the day, and both preceded violent upheavals that would completely change those cultures forever. Of course, the huge difference between Independence Day and Wells' original War of the Worlds is that Wells encourages the reader to reflect on their own position as citizens of an imperial power built on the exploitation of other people. Independence Day, not so much.
Welcome to Earth.
Dumb as rocks! In Independence Day, the aliens less reflect a broad cultural anxiety so much as arrogance. Yes, this incomprehensible technological force is impressive, but it cannot withstand the might of American ingenuity and hegemony, a bizarre and outlandish notion. So what do the aliens in War of the Worlds reflect? Well, kind of. The America of 1996 and the America of 2005 may as well exist in different dimensions. Here is 90s Batman.
7 million. Never leave the cave without it.
And here is 2000s Batman.
I swear to God. Swear to me!
The 90s had a very different, shall we say, mouthfeel. The white middle-class film-going public of 1996 didn't have much to worry about. Cold War's over, economy's booming, every middle school dance is getting jiggy with a charming little ditty called the Macarena, and Hollywood is spending a lot of time in thought exercises of, what if X disaster? We got tornadoes, we got volcanoes, we got sharks, we got asteroids, we got more asteroids. You just destroy everything, you know, it's fun.
Somebody down 911!
Here was an ecosystem in which we can release a movie like Mars Attacks, which was released the same year as Independence Day, and they could just blow up Congress willy-nilly and hey, it's funny.
They blew up Congress!
Americans were bored and disconnected from any kind of real social anxieties, and disaster movies were an effective outlet to get some quick, easy thrills and enjoy some blameless conflict.
I'm back!
It's a fun apocalypse. So compare this to the genuine, visceral terror we see in War of the Worlds. There isn't really any horror in seeing these symbols of American hegemony destroyed in the most complete and terrible way. Even now, it's not framed to be an uncomfortable thing to watch. In fact, it's kind of awesome. It's still kind of awesome. Here was a film where little children stare upon the smoldering ruins of the only home they have ever known and say things like,
What happened, Mommy?
Here's a film in which tens of millions of people have died, and this man whose family is missing, presumed dead, responds with,
No sir, I'm just a little anxious to get up there and whoop E.T.'s ass, that's all.
The 90s was a time in which it made narrative sense for aliens to ominously show up over major cities, and a lot of people are like, yeah, they come in peace. People dancing on top of the skyscraper like, woo! It's the 90s, did you catch Seinfeld last night? Aliens show up ominously and our dingbat president doesn't even evacuate the cities. But it's okay because he heroically plays a saxophone. He flies a plane and he shoots the aliens and America saves the day.
I'm a combat pilot, Will. I belong in the air.
And the film was dumb in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Like the sheer amount of time people spend on the phone in this movie, but no one ever allows any time for information to be conveyed.
This is the Secretary of Defense. Yes.
Mr. President, there are aliens outside.
Could you say that again?
Aliens, sir.
So playing on this idea of movie monsters, and invading aliens in particular, embodying cultural anxieties, why is the tone of the invasion narrative so different in 2005 as it is from 1996? Well, this is another entry into my ongoing series called Ignoring the seriousness of the massive loss of life and the scar to the national psyche, another pop culture casualty of the most destructive act of terrorism in modern history, at least for a time, the disaster movie. Gone were the days of goofy action movies like Independence Day and Godzilla and Wild Wild West. No more disaster movies for these jaded masses. The few stragglers that were in production before 9/11 and crept in after were released, ignored, and forgotten just as quickly. According to the Los Angeles Times in 2002, the public appetite for plots involving disasters and terrorism has vanished. Obviously, this did not stick, but for a while, filmmakers did not know how to approach mass destruction in film, so they just didn't. When big destructive action movies did eventually begin to edge their way back into theaters, things were different. A movie like Independence Day no longer makes sense in a post-9/11 world in which audiences have actually lived through watching the destruction of familiar landmarks and mass casualties on live television. So Spielberg wants to create an invasion narrative that works in a post-9/11 world. But there's a problem, see. War of the Worlds is, in many ways, a response to, if not refutation of, Independence Day. This
Let's kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
evolves into this.
We catch up with these soldiers, hook up with whoever else isn't dead, and we get back at them. We get back at them.
This
What happened, Mommy?
evolves into this.
I can't really drive it. I know that. That's where we're going right now. Rachel, they probably turned around.
And this, my favorite subtle dig.
Well, it's the 4th of July.
One of the biggest differences is the focus on what is being destroyed, what is at stake. In Independence Day, it is landmarks, buildings, cities, etc. In the War of the Worlds, there is much more focus on the loss of human life. The closest thing we get to big landmark destruction is the Bayonne Bridge. The horror comes not from mass destruction of landmarks and buildings, but from individuals. We see their faces as they are zapped out of existence. We see crowds as they are vaporized en masse. Roland's extermination is one of symbols, Spielberg's of human life. The most obvious refutation of Independence Day is the tone, which turns big optimistic 90s bombast into a low saturation death march. Where, as with all of Roland's movies, the fall of civilization brings people together, in War of the Worlds, the fall of civilization turns people into self-serving animals. Which becomes a problem with the film in and of itself. We'll get to that. But at the same time, Independence Day as a film codified a lot of generic staples in shorthand, which War of the Worlds certainly borrows. For instance, there's this. Followed then by the powering up sounds of the primary weapon. And of course, there is the design of the invaders. This is not to imply that the Independence Day aliens are the most original design ever. Again, they're basically just Roswell aliens, only a little, gooier. In part because it's implied in Independence Day that the Roswell aliens inspired our pop cultural ideas of what aliens look like. But in War of the Worlds, there's no in-universe reason like that for them to look the way that they do, only the real-world context of coming out after Independence Day, and of Independence Day setting a standard. So they end up looking pretty identical. Only I guess these guys have mouths, so that they can go blah. The aliens themselves also show up a little too late in the film to be anything really unfamiliar looking. This is a balancing act in any visual medium when you have a non-human creature. The more alien they look, the more time the audience has to spend getting used to them. In War of the Worlds, they don't show up until Act 3, so they pretty much have to look like what our preconceived idea of an alien will look like, or it's just gonna be confusing. But this comes after an hour of the sheer, unadulterated, terrifying eldritch horror that is the tripods. You spend hours building this up and then we get this. A scene which is the second scene in a row, which is a cut-rate ripoff from the raptor scene from Jurassic Park. Now let's do this scene again, but worse. I personally would rather not have seen the aliens, maybe have a hand at the end of the movie, but that's it. But showing them at all also contradicts the greater horror slant that War of the Worlds is going for. It's going for a more stylistically real invasion, where Independence Day is big and cartoonish from the get-go.
Is that glass bulletproof? No, sir.
So seeing these big-eyed, cute aliens feels incongruently silly. It's like if Schumacher's Riddler showed up in a Chris Nolan Batman movie.
You're as blind as a bat!
Do I look like a clown?
But we saw him in Independence Day, so guess we gotta do it here too. So War of the Worlds already has this problem of existing in the shadow of Independence Day. Now it has to walk this tightrope of that and also existing in a post-9/11 hellscape. Can Spielberg do it? Well, honestly, the answer was yes. For the first half of the film. In a time as complicated and shitty as the mid-Bush administration years,
check it out.
This is not to say that the War of the Worlds aliens are really embodiments of terrorism. Spielberg's intent here is less to say that terrorists are literally invading aliens than to tap into that sense of helplessness and impotent desire for retaliation Americans felt after 9/11.
Now we'll be the ones coming up from underground.
Of trying to capture that feeling through genre fiction.
Oh my God.
There's the misguided impulse to get back at an enemy you don't understand or even know how to fight.
We catch up with these soldiers, hook up with whoever else isn't dead, and we get back at them. We get back at them.
The rage and terror that something could threaten all this power and security that you didn't realize you never even really had. And in terms of sheer imagery, there is a lot in here. Even the very first shot of the film, we swoop in on the backdrop of the place where the World Trade Center used to be. Taking it a step further,
What's all this stuff all over you?
well, this image of Tom Cruise covered in gray dust is, it's loaded.
The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell, thank God.
As is this scene. It's not that aliens equals terrorists, it's Spielberg's ultimate statement on living in an America that no longer feels secure. We can't just mindlessly enjoy the cinematic destruction of a major city or landmark because we had just gone through this in real life. But none of these things are deal breakers. Obviously, mass destruction of cities makes their way back into the movies eventually, and a dark tone in a monster movie is a totally valid creative decision. With War of the Worlds, I think most people agree that it sours in the second half. People like to complain about the illogic of aliens burying tripods underground, or wouldn't they have known about the common cold, that sort of thing. But if I can forgive that sort of thing in Independence Day, I can definitely forgive it here. No, where War of the Worlds goes wrong is honestly a little simpler than that. One clear example of the problem with the structure of the story is the inconsistent theming. In direct contrast, I would say intentional direct contrast, to Roland's optimism of disaster bringing humanity together,
I'm not Jewish. Nobody's perfect.
here disaster turns humans into animals.
Listen, put down the gun. I'm taking the car.
Throughout the film, we see the increasing intensity of this theme. Ray must protect his children from other humans as much as he does from the aliens, and before we get to the end, he must kill another man to protect his daughter.
I can't let my daughter die because of you.
But then we work together when the plot needs us to. Suddenly at the end of the movie, with no change in circumstance, humans aren't barbarous animals, and suddenly it's teamwork.
Everybody down!
So, are humans monsters or aren't they? So, War of the Worlds is about this one guy's relationship to his children and how that is tested by apocalyptic alien invasion. This is relevant because the aliens are, at the emotional core of the film, what tests the strength of the family unit. Ray, the inadequate father, is forced for the first time in his life to take responsibility for his family. Can he do it?
You're an asshole. Hate coming here.
It's a solid conceit and firm grounding for a screenplay, and for the first half of the film, it executes this fairly well. But, you know, it kind of looks like the screenplay didn't have an answer to that question. Just look at that ending.
Okay, Dad.
And no, I don't mean how the aliens are defeated. Although I'm not a stickler for faithful adaptations, that is not the problem here. The resolution for the characters is the problem. Unlike Roland's trademark cast of thousands, War of the Worlds features a cast of 4. Well, I take that back. You have the 2 A-listers, one, this kid, and Tim Robbins, whose introduction brings the film's momentum to a screeching halt from which it never recovers. This movie did not need humanity to save the day, it needed a satisfactory arc for these 3 characters we spend the entire movie with, and that, and not how the aliens are defeated, is the core of this narrative. And it's kind of a hot mess.
Rachel.
For instance, Rachel. Dear Rachel.
Hey, she said she could get it. She said she could get it.
Just get it in the
It's got
drawer.
rollers.
Mom clearly thinks she's incapable. Dad says she can get it.
She said she could get it.
And it's almost like we're setting up a character arc here. Like, Rachel's gonna realize that she could, indeed, get it, even though mom and therapists coddle her to the point of being a complete deer in the head. Nope! Turns out Rachel can't get the bag. A realistic kid and well-rounded character in the first half, she's relegated to little more than a MacGuffin in Act 2 and basically just a doe-eyed trauma figurine in what passes for Act 3 in this movie, which is kind of a problem for the second biggest character in your movie. And here's the one spot where Independence Day is the superior film. Despite having the trademark Roland Emmerich cast of thousands, all of the character arcs are complete, and they work. They're silly, but they are complete. Roland manages to give all of them a starting point and a culminating moment. President Clintmore is faced with a country beginning to doubt his adequacy.
They elected a warrior and they got a wimp.
But through a series of trial and error, including the use of nuclear weapons,
May our children forgive us.
whoopsie daisy, he self-actualizes by firing his Secretary of Defense and he becomes the warrior the country needed. Literally.
Eagle 1. Fox 3.
Captain Hiller aspires to fly the space shuttle. a privilege which he is repeatedly denied. But after a series of conflicts and flying around a lot, he arguably becomes the most qualified person on the planet to fly the alien shuttle.
I've been waiting for this my whole life.
And David starts with his father and his ex-wife berating him for being a lazy genius.
So tell me something, are you so smart? How come you spend 8 years in MIT to become a cable repairman?
But in the end, not only does he rise above his inadequacy, his genius literally saves the world.
You know how I'm always trying to save the planet? Here's my chance.
There are 3 separate and distinguishable arcs here, and they are all set up really well so the audience is very clear about who's accomplishing what based on whose skill set by the time Act 3 rolls around, and we need to see those skills in action. Hell, even the Randy Quaid subplot, which seems genuinely pointless for most of the film, ends up being one of the most important elements in the movie. His motivation by way of his kids, why he's drunk all the time.
Oh yeah, seems years back our boy here was kidnapped by aliens, did all kind of experiments on him and such. Tell him about it, Russ.
His skill as a pilot, all of it. You know, we see it for a reason, so when it culminates...
All right, you alien assholes!
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Hello, boys! I'm back!
Whee! War of the Worlds, for all its masterful tension building, beautiful cinematography, genius sound design, and pretty good first half of a screenplay, does not have the same level of build-up and payoff as Independence Day. If you compare the 3 main character arcs in Independence Day, each cheesy but complete in its own little world, to the 1 protagonist character arc in War of the Worlds, what is Ray's culminating moment? He is set up as an inadequate father, a blue-collar kind of guy who does not know how to take care of his children and only endures his custody weekends out of obligation. And when the aliens invade, he is forced into a situation where he must care for his children, all the while said children, a teenage boy on the verge of manhood and a confused neurotic preteen, are actually acting their age.
Rachel, shut up, Rachel! I'm freaking you out! Look, I'm driving!
Ray does not know how to take responsibility for them, but through the situation, he is forced to. And the screenwriters didn't seem to know where to go with that. And this is where the movie falls apart. Robbie is constantly wanting to get out and break free and be a man, but break free from what?
You only chose Boston because you hope Mom's there, and if she's there, you can dump us on her.
Ray's not an overbearing father. He doesn't even give Robbie a slap on the wrist when he steals his car.
Robbie?
Oh, why, I might just smack my own hand. Nor is Robbie given any motivation to find some greater calling in Act 1. He doesn't lose anyone or see the initial carnage Ray saw. So this?
We catch up with these soldiers, hook up with whoever else isn't dead, and we get back at them.
Is the idiotic macho blathering of a teenage boy who has no idea what he's talking about. So by the time the movie starts to fall apart, Robbie has shown no maturation. And then this happens.
Robbie, stay together.
Robbie, no. Robbie, come back. Robbie, no, you're gonna ruin the movie, Robbie.
Get back here!
What do you think you're gonna be, the Randy Quaid of this movie? This movie doesn't get a Randy Quaid, Robbie. It's not 1996 anymore.
Please let me go. You need to let me go.
So now Robbie is basically out of the movie, and despite idiotically running into a gigantic fireball, don't worry, everyone makes it to Grandma's house in the end. He's fine. It's not even that Robbie needed to die in the fireball, it's that he needed a different story arc altogether. If they wanted it to be Ray realizes Robbie's a man, they should have built it to that, because Robbie as Rit is a complete dipshit.
Between any balls, we go back there and find one of those things and kill it.
Every action he takes is immature, spiteful, and wrong-headed.
Let's try one that doesn't involve your 10-year-old sister joining the army!
The movie begins with him stealing Ray's car, and he does not mature past this. He never once earns the trust that Ray deigns to give him. There's never a moment where Robbie and Ray learn to respect each other as men. So this?
Please let me go. You need to let me go.
It's like, where the hell did that come from? Let's draw a comparison to one of cinema's most famous you need to let go moments. When Marlon and Dory are trapped in a whale and Marlon has to make a metaphorical leap of faith.
He says it's time to let go. Everything's gonna be all right.
This is a culminating moment for Marlon's character. Marlon is an overprotective father. He's overbearing. He's overcompensating. He's neurotic. He has already endured the horrible loss of his wife, which makes the loss of Nemo his greatest fear and literally the worst thing that could happen to him.
How do you know something bad isn't gonna happen? I don't!
So Marlon letting go in the face of uncertainty is a signifier of character growth. Ray, on the other hand, he is a bad father, he makes no room in his life for his children, he is a poor caretaker, and he takes no interest in their lives.
I'm allergic to peanut butter.
Since when?
Birth.
So what sense does it make for this to be any kind of culminating moment? It's a kid who's trying to break free from a dad who was never really there for him in the first place. And Ray is eventually like, okay, do whatever you want. Yes, I see that the movie is trying to push that it's building up, that this is Robbie crossing into manhood and Ray learning to respect him as a man, but this does not work, given how obviously wrong-headed his moves to be a man have been and continue to be.
Please let me go. You need to let me go.
Nope!
If we had any balls, we go back there and find one of those things and kill it.
So it's at this point in the narrative that we trade in Robbie for Tim Robbins and spend the next 40 minutes in a basement. Tim Robbins slides into the role of Robbie in the narrative as the party who wants to fight back.
Why did you bring us here? To fight them together?
Against the wishes of Ray, who is just trying to not die, and it is the worst thing.
Now we'll be the ones coming up from underground.
Only we have no attachment to Tim Robbins. He is crazy, and he's just here now, in the movie. Yay! So rather than making it a story about how Robbie and Ray reconcile these two approaches to, alien invasion, all the while trying to keep the helpless girl child safe from the barbarousness of humanity, we get Tim Robbins.
We're right under their feet, Ray. Right here. Under their feet.
So pretty much no matter what happens after Robbie leaves the narrative, at least if he does consequence-free come back, which is what happens, it's not going to be satisfying to the audience as a story, because the payoff does not work, either logically, thematically, emotionally, with what was built up. So this isn't the real problem. This is. I'm not saying it would have been better if Robbie never came back into the well, I mean, kind of would have. It would have shown Ray that his inadequacy actually has a consequence, but rather that Ray steps up and is the goddamn dad for once. And then maybe later when this happens, Robbie plays some integral role and helps Ray out. Like maybe Robbie is the guy who grabs onto him and pulls him back out instead of this random guy we've never met. And then they all three realize that, yeah, they did need each other, something, and father-son develop a sense of, something, mutual respect, whatever, something that pays off the setup. And it was not a bad setup, but it needed to find some sense of organic resolution, or your audience is gonna be pissed that they spent the last 2 hours with these people. Which is more or less what happened. The problem of invasion narratives in general is that they're really difficult to resolve in ways that aren't just transparently unrealistic. But moreover, especially for American-made films, revenge is often a key element.
Get off my plane.
We want revenge against the invaders, and War of the Worlds 05 didn't deliver. It just kind of peters out, as does the narrative about Ray and his family. Both the invasion narrative and the character narrative just kind of slops out at the end like a dying alien out of a tripod. American audiences in 2005, jacked up on war on terror propaganda and seeking narratives that provide a sense of revenge, were left cold by the film upon release. In the 14 years since, feelings have softened on it to the point that there's a sort of cultural amnesia of how much people hated it at the time. But that it's finally getting a more positive reevaluation, or at least a more nuanced reevaluation, is deserved in my opinion. Except, of course, the resolution. Part of why invasion narratives have fallen out of favor is that they're really hard to resolve with a happy ending. We were okay with a dumb happy ending in 1996, but not in 2005, and not really now either. It will never be 1996 again. You cannot go back to Independence Day. If we can conceive of an other enemy that is capable of defeating us so completely, it's harder to suspend disbelief that there is a way we could fight back and have a happy ending. Now, a completeness in an invasion narrative just doesn't feel narratively truthful that humanity could survive something so devastating. And it's not that invasion narratives are gone, but nowadays they tend to be secondary to the main conflicts. In movies like Avengers, Transformers, or even Man of Steel, the invasion only happens in the third act, and all of these movies involve superpowered beings or giant anthropomorphic robots protecting the Earth, not normal humans as in Independence Day or War of the Worlds. Moreover, the villains in these films are not like locusts.
I like locusts. guess they're moving from planet to planet.
They are not intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic.
Intellects, vast and cool and unsympathetic.
They are, in effect, despite technically being aliens, human. Their motivations are clear and completely understandable to the audience. Movies with more straightforward alien invasions, as seen in films like Edge of Tomorrow, tend to be commercial failures. Now audiences want a twist, and the ones you do see tend to be low-budget suspense thrillers that have more in common with the horror genre and character studies than action sci-fi. Films like A Quiet Place and 10 Cloverfield Lane, for instance. So the alien invasion motif is not gone, but it's nothing like War of the Worlds or Independence Day. As filmgoers, we aren't really interested in villains we can't understand anymore. Part of that may be because we've culturally stared down an event that we were unprepared for and incapable of adequately resolving, in part because comprehending it would mean facing our own societal evil. So, an incomprehensible villain, mass audiences just aren't really interested in that anymore. And in the year of our Lord 2019, I can think of a number of reasons why that might be.
That's what I call a close encounter.
Living in LA, I sure do sit in a lot of traffic, so I get most of my reading done with our good friends at Audible. With Audible, you get access to an unbeatable selection of audiobooks including bestsellers, motivation, mystery, thrillers, memoirs, and more. Audible members can choose 3 titles every month, 1 audiobook, and 2 Audible originals. Orson Welles' original radio drama from the 1930s, which I used a very small amount of in this episode, is on Audible. There's a War of the Worlds musical that is an Audible original, so you get that on top of your free Audible credit. How could you say no? Listen on any device, anytime, anywhere, and you'll also enjoy easy audiobook exchanges, rollover, credits, and an audiobook library you keep forever, even if you cancel. Get started with a 30-day trial when you go to audible.com/Lindsay Ellis or text Lindsay Ellis to 500-500 and listen for a change.